Hi there. Thanks for tuning into Gold Comparisons. My name is Ilana Atlas, and I'm here with Sophia Lauterbach and Julia Mellon. Today we will be discussing several of the key themes and character trends in the American plays Fences by August Wilson and Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller, and how these ideas overlap and differ between the two plays. Both plays take place during or directly before the 1950s. Julia, please give us a brief summary of Fences.
Fences is about Troy Maxon, an African-American garbage collector in the 1950s, and the strains he creates on his wife, Rose, and his son, Corey, in his attempts to provide for them.
And Sophia, do you want to give us an idea of the plot of Death of a Salesman?
Yes, so Arthur Miller wrote this play in 1949, and the protagonist, Willie Loman, exhibits his internal, which then becomes external, battle with his desires to be known, and then his mostly unfulfilled life as a salesman. And then he is 63 years old, has a loving wife and 2 grown-up boys, and then these family dynamics in particular are really explored as the reader sees how Willie's memories and dreams are very closely tied to his relationship with his boys.
All right, so to kick off our discussion, I have a quick anecdote and then a question for the group. So, Sophia, I know that you texted me all excited after you read a specific section in Fences. Rose had just agreed to help Troy raise Raynell, who was the baby that Troy had with his mistress, Alberta. And so you texted me, you were very excited because you thought that was really respectable and that was a really, really awesome move on Rose's part because she took in this baby that was innocent, as Troy and Rose put it, while still rejecting Troy. I believe she said on page 79, she said, quote, "From right now, this child got a mother, but you a womanless man," end quote. So she quite directly was helping Troy by agreeing to raise Raynell. So my question to you guys is, do you think it would have been justifiable if Rose had said no?
Well, I was first very shocked when Rose took in Raynell. Well, not so much shocked as it was impressed the way that she did it, because I think we all were very mad when we saw how Troy had this affair with Alberta, because Rose was really doing everything in her power to make sure that Troy had a good life and that she made sure her boys, and even Lyons, who is not her own son but Troy's son, had a good life. And then how hurt she was, but then despite that, she ended up taking in Raynell. So, but she did it for Raynell, not for Troy, and I loved how she put it, that it was for Raynell because it was not Raynell's fault. And Raynell had then lost her mother, and it was really hard to then grow up without a mother, and she didn't want that for any baby. So I don't know if I would say it would be justifiable or injustifiable, because you see both sides. From my perspective in this times, I would say that it is not the responsibility of another woman to, I don't know, because I would say it's the responsibility of women to look out for each other, and she's a woman and then a little baby girl to look out for each other. But then at the same time, I don't know, I would definitely not have judged her if she didn't want to raise the baby that her husband had with a mistress.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, but I think society would disagree on this, because during this time, it's the 1950s, it's filled with conformity and these strict gender roles that are placed on women during this time, where wives need to be the ideal woman and dedicate their entire lives to their husbands and make sure that they're happy. And so I feel like society would be oh, Rose needs to do this because it's her job as a woman to take care of her husband.
But she told, although I do see how they're still husband and wife, even though she declares him a womanless man. So even though he is a womanless man, is it still his wife's responsibility to do these things?
Yeah, so they're still legally married. I would definitely say that it would be completely justifiable for her to decide not to, but at the same time, it may be respectable that she did. So
She
either-
definitely gained a lot of respect for me. I thought that was a really strong.
Yeah, I
move.
remember
Yeah, I
this
agree
text
with
I
that.
got from you, all caps, I
Yeah.
believe. You were very
I
excited.
was it caught me so off guard because I did not expect even that Troy would have the guts to come back and ask for his wife, who he knew he really hurt her.
Troy's behavior really, really made me angry. I remember in class, I kept saying, I'm so upset about
I
this. And
remember.
people were like, oh, Ilana, like, you're so into this. And I was just very angry. And I want to add on, actually, to Julia, what you said about gender roles during this time, and this was part of the reason it made me so upset. I had just studied this in my history class, and in the 70s, the Equal Rights Amendment failed because not enough state legislatures agreed to pass it. And this was just simply an amendment to the Constitution which would guarantee women equal rights. It's very basic, and it failed. And that wasn't that long ago. That was in the 70s. That was after this happened. So still, after these plays were written in the 70s, still an equal rights amendment couldn't even pass. And I think that's really important to keep in mind while we're reading this, is that society most definitely thought that it was Rose's obligation and responsibility to raise her husband's children, regardless of the role she played in conceiving them, and regardless of what she wanted to do.
Yeah, I feel like this really, or do you want to, I was kind of hoping to move on to Linda.
Yes.
You want to? So I was, I think this connects to, like, this can really, like, tie into, like, Linda in a way, because the same goes for her, because society, they want, these roles, wants Linda to really, how would you word it again? It's like wants to take care of their husband and that sort of
She's
thing.
the housewife.
Yeah, she's a housewife. And, like, that's her only job, like, kind of. And so, she's supposed to be, like, this ideal wife, and she's, described as this character by the author where she's, like, unconditionally loving of her husband, Willie, and, like, she, there's a quote that says, she more than loves him, she admires him as though his mercurial nature, his temper, his massive dreams, and the little cruelties served her only as sharp reminders of the turbulent longings with him. And, like, this kind of, like, shows, like, she, like, women, they're supposed to ignore any faults or issue, or, like, they're supposed to ignore any faults of their husbands, and instead have this unconditional, like, love, which I feel like is very different in a sense to Rose, because Rose, she was very loving towards Troy, but once she was faced with that, like, this situation with having Raynell there, and she was like, it's either I take care of Raynell, I'm not your wife, or I'm not taking care of her. That sort of thing.
It's interesting you compared Rose's kind of way of exhibiting these societal expectations to Linda's, because I also really noticed Linda kind of she really exhibited like kind of this stereotypical way that a woman should act, and then while Rose, she was almost like she was almost like the feminist of her time, kind of, at least in this sense, because she was given more of an opportunity to exhibit all the strengths that women can also have, even within that time. Like, she still had lots of jobs. Like, she says to Troy, your lunch is on the table, and you come in here, your lunch is on the table, and it's ready. Like, that was her job. And, like, what she says... And then she says this, and, like, what more do you want from me? She's doing her job. And then Linda then takes on a whole nother layer of these societal expectations, because she is not only taking care of Willie, which she says, like, he comes in and, like, almost in the very beginning, you could tell he'd had a long day, and she says to him, well, you'll just have to take a rest. You don't rest your mind, and it's very overactive. And that was on page 3. And so she's really taking care of Willie, much more so than you'd think a grown man really needs. And in addition to that, she tries to mend everything between the family.
Definitely, she's the family mediator.
Yeah.
Can I add one small thing to that?
I go after you.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm excited.
Definitely.
Keep going.
I just think it's very interesting how, like, no matter how much effort she tries to support Willie with, no matter, like, what she does, how perfect a wife she is, no matter what, Willie still succumbs to his insecurities and his insanity, in a sense, and, like, showing, like, that her efforts just didn't work.
Yeah, so, I have a question, which is, I know that we were discussing how Linda really leaned into that housewife role. She was really reflective of the typical white American housewife at the time, female domesticity, etc. And did Linda's seeming acceptance of the housewife role, frustrate you guys? Because I remember writing in my notes, she just lets him walk all over her. Because
yeah, that upset me a lot.
repeatedly, he
tells
would just
her,
say,
"Don't
"Don't interrupt,"
And he does that
It's
on
so
page-
frustrating
It
because
is.
she accepts it. And whenever Biff would stand up for her, she'd be like, "Well, what did you start that for?" And I found that so frustrating.
Because
Yeah.
he did that on page 46, twice on page 47, 48, 50, and I remember I took note of it because I felt that there was a layer of respect between them until Willie,
that.
it started with Willie wants really much that his son Biff and Happy will get into business, and Happy is in business, but Biff isn't quite yet, and it seemed like that was a reason for his insanity. But then once there was a chance that Biff would get into business is when when I noticed that disrespect between him and Linda. And before we move too far on, I just want to say, you both talked about how she really, Ilana, you talked about how she submisses to, like, the housewife role. And then, Julie, you had talked about how they both ignore their faults. But first, so to begin with, it didn't really bother me that Linda submissed to that housewife role, because my problem with a lot of, like, the female stereotypes that I know a lot of people have a problem with is that I find that I kind of like doing a lot of the things that are female stereotypes. Like, when I was thinking about when stereotypes were kind of first introduced to me, like, teaching about them, I was like, I'd much rather be inside cooking than I want to go cut the lawn. Like, and I'd much rather crochet than I would rather do some yard work. So I used to not have a problem with any of the stereotypes because I preferred to do them. And then now, looking at it through this book, looking at, like, different stereotypes through this book, there's a big difference between choosing to do something and having to do something because it's the societal demand.
Sorry, can I...
Yeah, you go, then I'll go.
So basically, I think that's really interesting because for me personally, I've kind of been a lot of my life kind of ignorant to these stereotypes actually, and like actually no, I've kind of seen it in elementary school and growing up kind of, and like the separation between boys and girls, that sort of thing. But like now as we like learn more about these like expectations and roles by society and stuff, I kind of like start to notice it in my own household.
Yeah, once you see that it's a requirement or that there are rigid lines, then it becomes harder to deal with.
Yeah, so my question is, it's so interesting that you bring that up because these women didn't have a choice, and we do. So, like, what do you think society would do to these women if they didn't submit? Because I said it was frustrating that Linda just took it. But I need to keep in mind that the consequences for her would have been really drastic if she hadn't.
I don't know if society would have done something so much as it would have been a problem with the husband.
I think she would have been ostracized. And also, I remember at the end, or I would have to look to see exactly where, but near the end of Fences, Troy grabs Rose. And we have to keep in mind that women are in danger, technically, at the hands of their husbands.
I got really
if they
worried
make them angry.
Because I knew there was a death in Fences as we were going. And I got really worried when she was grabbed by Troy, because I was like, oh no, is he going to kill her? Like, that actually ran through my mind.
There's definite danger involved.
Yeah, and going back to a little bit what you were saying before, I kept seeing how it like the possibility of change during this time. Like there's constant like efforts throughout history to like stop like women from breaking these stereotypes and like these rules, and I just find it like very interesting how at the end of the book Rose, she kind of is able to break that in a little bit of a sense, while like Linda, she isn't able to as much.
Yeah, they both definitely broke the molds in different ways, and then now looking at it through through today's lens, there are definitely people who are breaking the molds, because even now there are stereotypes.
Oh, certainly.
And it will be really interesting to see in the next few years how different books and plays and even songs and movies show the different ways that women start breaking the molds of the gender roles and how it changes from the past to now and then in the future.
Definitely.
And it even is broken.
And there's still that glass ceiling, and I can say that, you know, even if we like to do some of those stereotypically female things, I plan to continue fighting against the idea that we have to do those things.
Yeah.
So we
It's
can all come
all
to that
about the
agreement.
freedom.
All right, thank you for tuning into Gold Comparisons. We will end it there, and we'll talk to you next time.